The crunch of $1.2 million worth of Italian engineering folding under my rear bumper was the most satisfying thing I'd heard all year. I didn't stop to check the damage. I didn't pray for mercy. I just gripped the gear shift of my 6-ton tow truck and glared into the rearview mirror as the most powerful man in the North stepped out of the wreckage. Malakor didn't look angry. He looked hungry. "Nice bumper," he purred, his voice a low, vibrating hum that bypassed my ears and went straight to my spine. I didn't kneel. I didn't apologize. I vaulted out of the cab, slammed him against the mangled hood of his own Ferrari, and jammed a finger into his chest. "You're in a no parking zone, Sparky. Move, or I'll tow you next." Welcome back to the pack, everyone. You're listening to Raven's Library, your home for the grittiest and most heart-pounding werewolf romance. I am so glad you've joined us for today's premiere. Before we dive into the wreckage of our opening scene, I want to hear from you. Where in the world are you listening from today? And do you have a furry reading buddy curled up with you? Let us know in the comments. We love seeing where the pack gathers. If you want to support the library and get exclusive perks, consider hitting that join button to become an official channel member. Your support keeps these stories coming and helps us grow our community. Now, settle in. It's time to meet a king who just met his match. Chapter 1. The crunch of $1.2 million worth of Italian engineering folding under my rear bumper was more satisfying than it had any right to be. It wasn't the sound of a mistake, it was the sound of my escape. I didn't look in the rearview mirror to check the damage. I didn't pray to some distant lunar deity for mercy. I gripped the gear shift of my 6-ton tow truck, my knuckles white and grease-stained, and exhaled a lungful of adrenaline. Behind me, the 3 rogue wolves who'd been trying to run my truck off the mountain road slammed on their brakes, swearing as the black wreckage of a Ferrari blocked the narrow pass. I'd done it. I'd created a barricade. Then the driver's side door of the crushed car hissed open. A man stepped out. He didn't scramble. He didn't look shaken. He rose from the ruins of that matte black nightmare, like he was stepping off a private jet. He was tall, impossibly so, with shoulders that seemed to eat up the horizon, and eyes the color of a forest fire just before it turns to ash. He looked at the mangled heap of metal that used to be his car. Then he looked up at me through my shattered back window. "Nice bumper," he purred. His voice wasn't a scream of rage. It was a low, vibrating hum that bypassed my ears and went straight to the base of my spine. "I wonder if the rest of you is just as reinforced." I didn't wait for a second line. I threw my door open and vaulted out, my heavy work boots hitting the asphalt with a defiant thud. I had a job to finish, and this guy was a loose end I couldn't afford. "You're in a no parking zone, Sparky," I yelled, marching toward him. I didn't care that he looked like he was carved out of granite and expensive sin. I didn't care that the air around him felt heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" he asked. He started walking toward me, his stride slow and predatory. He wasn't looking at the road, or the rogues currently scrambling out of their SUVs behind his car. He was looking at me, like I was the only interesting thing in a world of boring casualties. "Yeah, I cleared the road," I snapped. As he got closer, the sheer physical pressure of his presence tried to make my knees buckle. It was that alpha weight, that invisible force designed to make everyone else crawl. I don't crawl. As he reached out, perhaps to grab my arm or intimidate me into silence, I moved. I didn't think about the consequences. My repo training kicked in, the kind of defensive reflex you develop when you spend your nights taking cars away from angry shifters. I stepped into his space, grabbed his reaching hand, and used his own momentum against him. In one fluid motion, I pivoted, caught his lead leg with my boot, and slammed him back against the crumpled hood of his Ferrari. Clang! I jammed my forearm against his throat, pinning him. It should have been impossible. He was twice my size and radiated a power that could level a building. But the shock of the insult, the sheer audacity of a female pinning him, gave me the 2-second window I needed. "Listen to me, you overgroomed disaster," I hissed, leaning in so close I could smell the expensive bourbon and cedarwood on his skin. "I'm in the middle of a high-speed reclamation. You're an obstacle. If you move, if you growl, or if you try to pull that 'do you know who I am' routine, I will zip-tie you to your own steering wheel and leave you for the rogues. Do we have an agreement?" I expected him to shift. I expected him to tear my throat out. Instead, Malakor, the king of the northern wastes, the wolf who held the keys to every cage in the territory, let out a dark, husky laugh that vibrated against my arm. His hands came up, but he didn't push me off. He let his fingers graze the sides of my waist, a possessive, lingering touch that felt like a brand. "Agreement," he whispered, his eyes darkening until the pupils swallowed the amber. He looked down at my forearm, then back up at my face, a terrifyingly sharp smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Sweetheart, you can pin me here all night if you like. I haven't been spoken to like a nuisance in 100 years. It's refreshing." His grip on my waist tightened, drawing me an inch closer until our chests brushed. The heat rolling off him was enough to melt the snow on the nearby peaks. "But we have a problem," he continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous, silky edge. "You see, my guards are about 10 seconds away from turning this mountain into a graveyard because you touched me. And I'm starting to think the only way I'll let you live is if I keep you for myself." The sound of 12 heavy black SUVs skidding to a halt behind us cut through the air. Doors flew open. The rhythmic, metallic clack-clack of high-caliber rifles being readied echoed off the canyon walls. I looked over my shoulder and saw the royal crest on the lead vehicle. The gold wolf. The crown. I looked back at the man I currently had pinned against a ruined car. He wasn't just some rich guy in a Ferrari. He was the reason the rogues had stopped chasing me. They weren't afraid of my truck anymore. They were terrified of the man I was currently choking. "Oh," I muttered, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "You've got to be kidding me." Malakor's grin widened, showing the faint, lethal tips of his canines. "I don't kid about my property, Kira, and you just totaled my favorite car. Now, how are you going to pay me back?" Behind me, 50 soldiers leveled their weapons at my head. "Don't shoot!" Malakor roared, his voice suddenly booming with the authority of a god, though he didn't move an inch from my grip. "She's not a threat. She's my new driver." He looked back at me, his eyes glowing with a terrifying, obsessive light. "Get in the truck, Kira. We're going home." Chapter 2. The click of 50 safety catches being switched off echoed like a death knell in the mountain pass. I didn't let go of Malakor's throat. If I was going down, I was going down holding the most expensive collateral in the hemisphere. My heart was slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my face remained a mask of cold, repo agent iron. "Your driver?" I repeated, my voice steady despite the sea of red laser sights dancing across my tactical vest. I don't drive for anyone who doesn't have a commercial license and a signed work order. You're a liability, not a boss. Malakor's hands were still on my waist, his thumbs tracing slow, deliberate circles against the fabric of my shirt. He didn't seem to care about the rifles pointed at us, or the fact that his $1.2 million car was currently an accordion. He was looking at my mouth with a hunger that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with conquest. The liability is currently the only thing standing between you and 500 rounds of silver-tipped hollow points, Malakor murmured, his amber eyes flashing. My men are very protective. They don't like seeing their king pinned to a bumper like a common street brawler. Then tell them to back off before I decide to see if your Royal Highness can breathe through a collapsed windpipe, I snapped. I leaned in harder, my forearm digging into the soft tissue of his neck. I wasn't being a hero, I was being a survivor. In my world, if you show a wolf an inch of fear, they'll take your entire life. Malakor's laugh was a low, dark vibration that I felt in my own marrow. Gods, you're fierce. It's like watching a wildfire try to hold back the ocean. He raised a hand, just one, and the 50 soldiers froze. Stand down. Fall back to the perimeter. The lady and I are negotiating a settlement. The soldiers hesitated, their confusion palpable even from 20 yards away. They had never seen the Alpha King being manhandled, let alone enjoying it. Slowly, the laser dots vanished from my chest, but the tension in the air remained thick enough to choke on. Settlement over, I said, finally releasing him and stepping back. I didn't run. I walked back to my truck, my spine straight. Send the bill to my agency. I'm late for a drop-off. I swung up into the cab of the tow truck, but before I could slam the door, a heavy boot wedged into the frame. Malakor was there, his silhouette blocking out the sun. He didn't look like a victim anymore. He looked like a storm front. The agency is gone, Kira, he said, his voice dropping the playful edge for something sharper, more lethal. While you were busy crushing my Ferrari, my beta was busy seizing your office. The rogues you were fleeing, they weren't after the car you repoed. They were the cleanup crew sent to erase you. The blood in my veins turned to slush. You're lying. I don't lie to things I intend to keep, he said, stepping into the cramped cab and forcing me across the bench seat. He didn't ask, he just moved in, his massive frame making the interior feel like a coffin. The rogues are regrouping. My guard is compromised. And you, sweetheart, are the only person on this mountain who has the balls to drive through a blockade without blinking. He reached over me, his scent, mountain air and ancient power overwhelming my senses as he grabbed the steering wheel. He didn't take it. He just rested his hand next to mine. Drive, he commanded, or we both die on this ridge, and I'm not ready to let you go yet, not until I find out exactly how much accidental violence it takes to make you scream my name. I looked at the road ahead, then at the king, sitting in my passenger seat like he owned the rusted upholstery. I slammed the truck into gear. If you touch the radio, I'm throwing you out at 60 miles per hour. Deal, he whispered, his eyes glowing in the shadows of the cab. I floored it, the tow truck roaring to life as we barreled toward the first line of rogue SUVs. But as the speedometer climbed, I noticed something in the side mirror. My truck wasn't the only thing moving. A black helicopter was rising from the valley floor, its nose-mounted gun turret pivoting toward my windshield. The first burst of heavy-caliber fire shredded the top of my crane assembly. The truck bucked, metal screaming as the rounds tore through the steel like it was wet paper. I didn't scream. Screaming was for people who had time to waste. I yanked the wheel hard to the left, sent the truck into a controlled slide, and used a jagged rock outcropping to shield our flank. "Get your head down!" I barked at the Alpha King. "I don't hide, Kira," Malakor said, his voice terrifyingly calm, even as a bullet shattered the side mirror inches from his ear. He was watching me, fascinated by the way I wrestled the 6-ton beast through the narrow turns. "Then get useful!" I reached under my seat, pulled out a heavy-duty silver-weighted cargo net launcher, and shoved it into his chest. "Aim for the tail rotor or the pilot's view. If that bird stays in the air, we're scrap metal." Malakor looked at the launcher, then at me. A slow, wicked grin spread across his face. "You're ordering the Sovereign of the North to act as your gunner?" "I'm ordering the guy in my passenger seat to earn his keep," I snarled, dodging a fallen log. "Now move, or I'll use my physical authority to kick you out the door myself." He let out a sharp, exhilarated bark of laughter and stood up in the vibrating cab, bracing his boots against the dash. He didn't use the launcher like a human would. He poured his own predatory intent into the tool, his muscles bulging beneath his designer shirt as he leaned out the window. The helicopter looped back for another pass. I didn't wait for them to aim. I jammed the brakes, swung the back of the truck around in a cloud of dust, and gave Malakor the perfect angle. Thwip, crump! The silver net expanded in the air, a shimmering web of weighted death. It didn't hit the rotor. It fouled the engine intake. The helicopter didn't explode. It just stopped breathing. It tilted, spiraling into the trees with a spectacular crash that shook the earth. I didn't stop to celebrate. I pushed the truck harder, the engine whining in protest as we cleared the forest line and hit the open highway. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of our breathing. "You're insane," I muttered, my hands shaking slightly on the wheel now that the immediate threat was a fireball in my rear view. "And you're a masterpiece," Malakor replied. He sat back down, seemingly unbothered by the glass shards in his hair. He reached over, and before I could pull away, he tucked a stray lock of hair behind my ear. His touch was electric, a searing contrast to the cold wind whistling through the broken windows. "Most people see a king and think of a throne. You saw a king and thought of a weapon. I like being used by you, Kira." "Don't get used to it," I said, though my heart was doing a traitorous somersault. "As soon as we hit the city, I'm dropping you at the nearest palace and taking my truck to a body shop. We're even." "We aren't even until I say we are," he said, his voice dropping to that possessive, velvety register that made my skin itch with a strange heat. "You destroyed my car. You assaulted my person. You kidnapped me in a vehicle that smells like diesel and desperation. The debt is astronomical. I saved your life. A secondary detail," he dismissed with a wave of his hand. "The fact remains, you are now the most wanted woman in the territories. My beta has put a price on your head that would tempt a saint. You can't go back to your life. There is no body shop that can fix the target on your back." I pulled the truck over to the shoulder, the tires screeching. I turned to him, my eyes blazing. "Then what do you want from me, Malakor? You want me to kneel? You want an apology? Because you're going to be waiting until the sun burns out." He leaned across the console, his face inches from mine. I could see the golden flecks in his irises, the predatory focus of a man who had finally found something worth hunting. "I don't want you to kneel," he whispered, his breath hot against my lips. "I want you to keep fighting me. I want you to run the security for my coronation, and I want you to do it while wearing my mark, because the only place you're safe from my enemies is in my bed." I went to shove him back, my palm hitting his chest to push him away from my personal space, but he caught my wrist midair. He didn't squeeze, he just held me there, his pulse thrumming against my skin. "Is that a threat?" I challenged. "It's a prophecy," he said. Before I could retort, the truck's radio, the one I'd told him not to touch, crackled to life. It wasn't music, it was a distorted, growling voice that made the air in the cab turn cold. "King Malakor, we have the girl's brother. If you want him to keep his skin, you'll bring us the reclamation drive she stole. You have 3 hours." My world stopped. I didn't have a drive. I didn't know what they were talking about. But I knew my brother was the only thing I had left to lose. I looked at Malakor. His face had gone from flirty to absolute chilling murder. "New plan," he said, his voice a low snarl. "We're not going to the palace. We're going to war." Chapter 4. "I don't have a drive, Malakor," I shouted, the truck fishtailing as I pulled back onto the asphalt, my foot buried in the floorboards. Panic was trying to claw its way up my throat, but I shoved it back down. I couldn't afford to be a victim. Not now. I was repossessing a 2022 Suburban from a low-level drug runner. There was nothing in that car but empty fast food bags and a spare tire. "Think, Kira." Malakor's voice was like a whip, cracking through my spiraling thoughts. He didn't look panicked. He looked like he was calculating the most efficient way to dismantle a city. "The rogues wouldn't burn down your agency and kidnap your kin for a Suburban. What did you find? What did you move?" I racked my brain, the images of the night blurring together. The glove box was locked. I didn't have the key, so I ripped the door off its hinges because I was in a hurry. There was a small silver casing. I thought it was a high-end vape or something. I tossed it into my toolkit. I gestured wildly to the back of the cab, where my heavy, grease-covered metal box sat. Malakor didn't hesitate. He lunged into the back, his movements fluid and powerful, and flipped the lid. Tools scattered, wrenches, screwdrivers, and silver-tipped bolts clattering against the floor. He held up a small, unassuming silver cylinder. It looked like nothing, but in his hand it started to hum. A faint blue light pulsed from the seams. "This isn't a vape," Malakor said, his expression hardening. "This is a neural link bypass. It contains the encrypted codes for the city's silver gas defense system. Whoever has this can turn the shifter capital into a slaughterhouse with the push of a button." "And you think my brother is being held by the people who want that?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I think your brother is being held by my beta, Vane," Malakor said, his eyes glowing with a terrifying intensity. "He's the only one with the resources to coordinate this. He didn't just want my throne. He wanted the means to ensure no other alpha could ever take it back." "Then we give it to him," I said immediately. "I don't care about your city or your throne. I want Leo." "If we give him this, we die anyway," Malakor countered, his grip tightening on the cylinder. "Vane doesn't leave witnesses, especially not fierce, troublesome repo agents who have a habit of pinning kings to Ferraris." He looked at me, and for the first time there was a flicker of something almost like respect, or something deeper, in his gaze. "We need a distraction. We need to hit them where they don't expect it." "They expect a king to come with an army," I said, a dark idea starting to form in my mind. "They expect you to negotiate from a position of power. They don't expect a battered tow truck to come crashing through the front gates of the Black Site holding facility." Malakor's eyebrows rose. "You want to ram a fortified compound? In this?" "This truck has reinforced steel plating and a hydraulic ram on the front bumper," I said, a grim smile finally touching my lips. It was built to pull semis out of frozen ditches. A gate won't even slow me down. I love the way your mind works, Malakor whispered, leaning in closer. It's chaotic, violent, and entirely perfect. Keep your compliments for after we're not being hunted, I snapped, though I didn't move away. Here's the deal, Your Majesty. We do this my way. I drive. I set the pace. You handle the heavy lifting once we're inside. And if you try to take charge, I will use that silver net on you. Malakor reached out, his hand cupping the back of my neck, his thumb pressing into the sensitive skin just below my ear. It was a move of pure dominance, but he wasn't forcing me down. He was pulling me in. I'll let you lead, Kira, he murmured, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. For now. But once your brother is safe, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about what happens when you lay hands on a king. I look forward to it, I said, meeting his gaze head on. I've got a lot more assaults left in me. We hit the outskirts of the industrial district, the massive concrete walls of the black site rising up like a tomb against the darkening sky. I saw the guards on the towers, the heavy iron gates, and the black SUVs idling in the courtyard. I didn't slow down. I shifted into the highest gear, gripped the wheel, and felt the raw power of the truck surge beneath me. Hold on to something, Sparky, I growled. I floored it. The truck screamed as it hit 80. We were 50 yards from the gate when the siren started to wail. Kira, Malakor said, his voice surprisingly soft amidst the roar of the engine. What? Nice bumper. Then we hit the gates. The world exploded into a shower of sparks, twisted metal, and the deafening roar of a king's war cry. But as we burst into the courtyard, I realized Malakor had lied about one thing. There wasn't just a guard waiting for us. There was an entire battalion, and they were all in mid-shift. Chapter 5. The iron gates didn't just break, they disintegrated. My truck's hydraulic ram hit the center seam at 90 miles per hour, sending shards of industrial steel flying like shrapnel into the courtyard. The steering wheel jerked violently, trying to snap my wrists, but I held on through pure, unadulterated spite. "Keep your head down!" I roared over the sound of crumpling metal. I didn't need to tell Malakor twice. He wasn't cowering. He was coiled. As we skidded across the concrete, the tires screaming in protest, a dozen wolves in mid-shift scrambled out of our path. Their bones were cracking, fur sprouting through tactical gear, their eyes glowing a sickly, traitorous yellow in the floodlights. "There!" I yelled, pointing toward the holding block. "If Leo is anywhere, he's in the basement levels." I slammed the truck into a spin, using the heavy back end to sweep a row of parked SUVs into a pile of scrap. Before the truck had even stopped moving, Malakor was out the door. He didn't shift. He didn't need to. He moved with a speed that defied human physics, a blur of shadow and lethal intent. He caught the first wolf, a half-shifted monster twice his size, by the throat, and slammed him into a concrete pillar with enough force to crack the stone. "Kira, stay with the truck," he commanded, his voice vibrating with a power that made the very air feel heavy. "Like hell!" I vaulted out of the cab, grabbing my heavy-duty maglite, the one weighted with lead and silver. "I'm not sitting here while you play hero with my brother's life." I ran toward him, ducking under the swipe of a massive claw. I didn't panic. I stepped into the beast's reach, used the base of my maglite to strike the nerve cluster in its neck, and delivered a knee to its solar plexus. As the wolf wheezed, I grabbed its ear and slammed its head into the side of my truck. "Nice follow-through," Malakor remarked, snapping the neck of another attacker without even looking. He turned to me, his face splashed with blood that wasn't his eyes burning with a dark, terrifying pride. "But you're supposed to be my driver, not my vanguard." "I'm a freelancer, Sparky. I go where the work is," I snapped, wiping a smudge of grease and blood off my cheek. "And right now, the work is downstairs." We reached the heavy blast door of the basement. It was locked from the inside, 6 inches of reinforced steel. Malakor placed his hand on the handle, his muscles tensing. "This will take a moment," he muttered. "We don't have a moment." I shoved him aside. "Move. I've got a better way." I ran back to the truck, grabbed the heavy-duty winch cable, and hauled it toward the door. Malakor watched, his arms crossed over his chest, a smirk playing on his lips as I looped the silver-threaded cable around the door's locking mechanism. "You're going to tow the door off?" he asked, his voice dripping with amusement. "I'm going to reclaim it," I corrected. I hopped back into the driver's seat, threw it into reverse, and floored it. The cable went taut. The truck groaned, the tires smoking as they fought for traction. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a scream of tortured metal that set my teeth on edge, the blast door was ripped clean out of the wall. "Effective," Malakor conceded, stepping over the wreckage and heading into the dark stairwell. We descended into the bowels of the facility, the air smelling of ozone and fear. At the bottom of the stairs, a single figure stood waiting in the flickering light. It wasn't a wolf. It was a man in a lab coat, holding a detonator. "One more step, and the boy dies," he hissed. I felt Malakor freeze beside me, his aura shifting from predatory to cataclysmic. But before he could unleash the king, I stepped forward. I didn't look at the detonator. I looked at the man. "You've got 5 seconds to drop that before I show you exactly what happens when you interfere with a repo," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You think I'm afraid of a human girl?" the man sneered. I didn't answer. I reached into my belt, pulled a silver-tipped bolt, and flicked it with a wrist snap I'd practiced for years. It didn't hit his chest. It hit the detonator, pinning his hand to the wall behind him. He screamed, the device clattering to the floor. Malakor was on him in a heartbeat, pinning him by the throat. "Where is the boy?" The man pointed a trembling finger toward a heavy glass observation room. Inside, a teenager was curled into a ball, surrounded by canisters of hissing silver gas. "Leo!" I screamed, lunging for the glass. But as I reached for the handle, the floor beneath us shuddered. A familiar, cold voice boomed over the intercom. "A valiant effort, brother, but you were always too distracted by beautiful things." The glass didn't shatter. Instead, the room started to sink into the floor. "Malakor!" I yelled, grabbing his arm, my nails digging into his skin. "He's taking him!" Malakor looked at the sinking room, then at me. His eyes were no longer amber. They were solid gold. "Stay behind me," he growled, the sound vibrating in my chest. "I'm going to drop the ceiling." Chapter 6. "Are you insane?" I shrieked, grabbing Malakor's shoulder and spinning him around. The physical contact was like touching a live wire, but I didn't let go. "The ceiling is 3 feet of reinforced concrete. You drop this place and Leo dies with us." Malakor didn't flinch. He looked down at my hand on his shoulder, his expression a terrifying mix of royal fury and obsessive fixation. "Vane is lowering that room into a pressurized incinerator, Kira. We have exactly 60 seconds before your brother is ash. I am the king of the North. I don't ask the Earth for permission. I command it. Not while I'm standing here. I shoved him back, my palms hitting his chest with enough force to make him stumble. It was a suicidal move, shoving an alpha king in the middle of his bloodlust, but I didn't have time for his ego. Look at the hydraulics. If you collapse the structure, the safety locks will engage and seal that room forever. We need to jam the gears, not destroy the building. Malakor froze, his golden eyes narrowing as he processed my words. He wasn't used to being corrected. He wasn't used to anyone having the balls to stand in the way of his power. He took a step toward me, his presence looming, a dark shadow that seemed to swallow the flickering emergency lights. "You're bossy," he murmured, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that sent a shiver of something far more complicated than fear down my spine. "And you're right. I'm always right. Now get over there and hold that gear assembly." I pointed toward a massive rotating iron cog that was lowering the observation room. Malakor didn't argue. He moved. He dove into the machinery, his bare hands grabbing the serrated teeth of the gears. I watched in horrified awe as his muscles bunched and strained, the fabric of his shirt shredding as he fought the mechanical might of the entire facility. The screeching of metal on metal was deafening, sparks showering over him like falling stars. He was holding back tons of pressure with nothing but raw shifter strength. "Kira, now!" he groaned, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth would shatter. I didn't waste a second. I dove under the main platform, sliding through a pool of hydraulic fluid that ruined my favorite work jacket. I saw the secondary bypass valve, the one Vane had tried to remote lock. I jammed my mag light into the pressure release, using it as a lever. "Come on, you piece of junk!" I hissed, putting every ounce of my weight into the handle. With a hiss of escaping steam, the platform groaned to a halt. The room stopped sinking. I scrambled out from under the machinery and sprinted to the glass door. It was locked with an electronic keypad, but I didn't have the code. I didn't need it. I grabbed a heavy silver-tipped wrench from my back pocket and smashed the interface until it sparked and died. The door hissed open. "Leo!" My brother scrambled out, coughing from the faint traces of silver gas, and collapsed into my arms. I held him for a heartbeat, the relief so sharp it felt like a physical wound. "I've got you," I whispered. "I've got you." A heavy thud behind us made me jump. Malakor had released the gears. He stood there, his chest heaving, his hands bleeding from where the iron teeth had bitten into his skin. He looked like a god of war who had just crawled out of a furnace. He didn't look at Leo. He looked at me. "Is he safe?" Malakor asked, his voice strained. "Yes," I said, standing up and shielding Leo behind me. I looked at Malakor's mangled hands. You actually did it." "I told you," he said, stepping closer, his shadow falling over us both. He reached out with a blood-stained hand, his fingers grazing my jawline. He didn't care about the pain. He didn't care about the facility collapsing around us. "I don't let go of what is mine, and whether you like it or not, Kira, you are mine." "I'm nobody's property, Sparky," I retorted, though I didn't pull away from his touch. The heat radiating from him was intoxicating. "We'll see," he whispered. Suddenly, the intercom crackled again, followed by a rhythmic, heavy thumping from the corridor above. It sounded like 100 boots hitting the floor in perfect unison. "Brother," Vane's voice returned, smooth and cold. "You've saved the boy. How touching. But you've also trapped yourself in a basement with only one exit. And I've just authorized the deployment of the silver mist canisters for the entire sector. If you don't come out and kneel in 10 minutes, everyone in this facility, human and wolf alike, will have their lungs melted from the inside out." I looked at the vents. A faint, shimmering white mist was already beginning to curl into the room. "Malakor," I whispered, the panic returning. "The gas." Malakor didn't look worried. He looked at me, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "I hope you're as good a driver as you are a mechanic, Kira, because we're not going out through the door." "Then where are we going?" He pointed straight up at the ceiling, where the truck was still idling in the courtyard above. "We're going up." "You want me to do what?" I stared at Malakor like he'd finally lost his royal mind. The silver mist was thickening now, clinging to the floor like a toxic shroud. Leo was already coughing, his face turning a pale, sickly gray. We were running out of time, and the king was pointing at a concrete ceiling like it was a sunroof. "The winch, Kira!" Malakor roared over the sound of the rising sirens. "The cable is still attached to the blast door frame above. If you can get that truck into high-torque reverse from down here, you can pull the entire floor assembly up." "I can't drive a truck from a basement, Malakor. I'm a repo agent, not a telepath." "The remote," Leo wheezed, pointing to the belt at my waist. "Kira, the industrial remote for the winch." I looked down. The heavy, yellow plastic remote was still clipped to my belt. It was designed for winching heavy loads from a distance, so the operator didn't get crushed if a cable snapped. It had a max torque override. "It'll snap the cable," I said, my heart hammering. "If the angle is wrong, that 6-ton truck comes crashing down on our heads." "Then don't get the angle wrong," Malakor said. He stepped toward me, grabbing my waist and hoisting me up toward the hole in the ceiling where the door used to be. "I'll boost you. Get as close as you can. Secure the secondary lines. I'll hold the structure while you pull." I didn't argue. I scrambled up his shoulders, using his head as a stepping stone. I heard him grunt in a mix of surprise and dark amusement, and grabbed the jagged edge of the concrete floor above. I pulled myself into the crawl space, the silver mist stinging my eyes. The truck was still there, sitting precariously over the hole I'd ripped in the floor. The cable was humming with tension. "Leo, get ready to jump!" I yelled down. I grabbed the remote and smashed the engage button. The truck's engine, left running in the chaos, roared to life as the winch took the strain. The metal screamed. The concrete groaned. "Kira, it's slipping!" Malakor's voice came from below, strained and guttural. I leaned out over the edge, seeing him standing in the center of the mist, his arms braced against a collapsing support beam. He was literally holding the ceiling up so we didn't get crushed. "Jump, Leo! Now!" My brother leaped, catching my hand. I hauled him up into the crawl space just as a section of the floor gave way. "Malakor, move!" I screamed. The king didn't move. He looked up at me, his eyes glowing like twin suns in the fog. "Pull the lever, Kira. Don't look at me. Pull it." I hit the emergency retract. The truck lurched backward, the winch cable snapping taut with a sound like a gunshot. The entire floor section we were standing on tilted violently. For a second, I thought we were going down. Then, with a deafening crack, the truck dragged us, and the 3 tons of concrete we were clinging to, up and out of the hole like a giant fishing lure. We hit the courtyard floor with a bone-jarring thud. I scrambled to my feet, dragging Leo toward the cab of the truck. I looked back at the hole. "Malakor!" The mist was pouring out of the gap now, a fountain of silver death. Silence followed. Then, a hand, clawed, bloody, and massive, gripped the edge of the concrete. Malakor hauled himself out, his clothes nearly gone, his skin shimmering with the effects of the silver gas. He wasn't shifting, but he was close. His fangs were elongated, his face a mask of primal rage. He looked at the black SUVs surrounding us. Vane's soldiers were closing in, their masks on, their weapons leveled. "Enough," Malakor whispered. The word wasn't loud, but it carried across the courtyard like a thunderclap. He didn't look at the soldiers. He looked at me. "Kira, get in the truck." "Malakor, we have to go," I yelled, opening the driver's side door. "No," he said, turning toward the battalion. He stood tall, the silver mist swirling around his ankles like a cape. He looked every bit the Alpha King, even in rags. "I am done running from my own shadow. Vane, come out and face me, or I will burn this facility to the ground with everyone in it." From the shadows of the main building, a man stepped out. He was dressed in a pristine white suit, a stark contrast to the carnage. He held a small black remote. "You always were dramatic, brother," Vane said, his voice amplified by the courtyard speakers. "But you're weak. You chose a human girl over your kingdom, and now you'll watch her die." Vane didn't point a gun. He pointed the remote at the truck. "Kira, get out!" Malakor screamed. I looked at the dashboard. A small red light I'd never seen before was blinking rapidly. It wasn't one of mine. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," I whispered. The truck didn't explode. Instead, the doors slammed shut and locked magnetically. The engine revved to a deafening scream, the wheels spinning on the concrete. The truck wasn't under my control anymore. "Nice bumper, Kira," Vane's voice mocked over the radio. "Let's see how it handles a 100-foot drop." The truck slammed into gear and launched itself toward the perimeter cliff at full throttle. I was trapped. Chapter 8. The locks clicked with the finality of a guillotine blade. I yanked at the handle, but the magnetic seal didn't even budge. My own truck, my sanctuary, my livelihood, had turned into a high-speed coffin. Beside me, Leo was frantically clawing at the passenger window, his face pale with terror as the speedometer climbed toward 90. "Kira, it won't open!" he yelled. "I know!" I barked, my hands flying over the dashboard. I wasn't looking at the road. I was looking for the breach. Vane must have slipped a remote link into the OBD port while they had me in the courtyard. I didn't waste time with the steering wheel. It was spinning freely in my hands, a useless plastic ring. The truck was being guided by a ghost, and that ghost was currently aiming us straight for the jagged cliffside that overlooked the Blackwater River. "Kira, look!" Leo pointed ahead. A shadow was moving alongside us. It wasn't a car. It was Malakor. He was running, not like a human, but with the terrifying, ground-eating stride of a predator. He was keeping pace with the truck doing 90, his eyes fixed on me through the glass. He looked less like a man and more like a force of nature, his teeth bared in a snarl that promised a slow death to whoever was holding the remote. He lunged. His body hit the driver's side door with a bone-jarring thud. The entire truck rocked. Through the window, I saw his blood-slicked fingers digging into the metal of the door frame, his claws leaving deep gouges in the reinforced steel. "Kira, break the link!" he roared, his voice barely audible over the wind and the screaming engine. "I'm trying!" I yelled back. I reached into my boot and pulled out my heavy-duty wire cutters. I didn't care about the warranty. I didn't care about the truck. I kicked the panel off the steering column, exposing the nest of multicolored wires. 20 seconds! Leo screamed. The edge of the cliff was rushing toward us, the moonlight glinting off the dark water hundreds of feet below. I didn't have time for a surgical strike. I grabbed the entire cluster of wires and yanked. Sparks showered my lap, stinging my skin. But the truck didn't slow down. The remote link had its own backup power. "Get back!" I yelled to Malakor. I didn't ask him to move. I used my heavy mag light to smash the side window. Shards of safety glass exploded inward, peppering the cabin. Malakor didn't flinch. He used the opening to grab the interior roll bar. "The brakes are locked!" I screamed at him. "I can't kill the motor!" Malakor didn't say a word. He let go of the door with one hand and reached for the front wheel well. I watched in horror as he jammed his bare arm into the moving machinery of the tire. There was a sickening sound of grinding metal and snapping bone. But the truck lurched. He was acting as a physical brake. "Malakor, stop! You'll lose the arm!" "Shut up and steer!" he growled, his face contorted in agony. The friction slowed us just enough. I grabbed the emergency brake, the only manual override left, and yanked it so hard the cable snapped just as we hit the dirt shoulder. The truck spun, the back end swinging out over the abyss. For a heartbeat, we balanced on the edge, the rear tires spinning in empty air. Then the weight settled. We were down. I didn't wait for the adrenaline to fade. I scrambled out of the broken window, falling onto the dirt. I didn't check on Leo. I knew he was okay. I ran to the front of the truck where Malakor lay, his arm a mangled mess of blood and torn fabric. "You idiot," I whispered, dropping to my knees beside him. "You absolute royal idiot." He looked up at me, a pained but triumphant smirk on his face. "Nice bumper," he wheezed, before his eyes rolled back in his head. Before I could even check his pulse, the sound of a helicopter rotor washed over us. Vane wasn't done. He was descending from the sky, a spotlight blinding me as I shielded Malakor's body with my own. Chapter 9. The spotlight was so bright, it felt like a physical weight, pinning us to the dirt. I looked up, squinting through the glare, and saw the black belly of Vane's personal transport hovering just 30 feet above the cliffside. The wind from the rotors whipped my hair into a frenzy, stinging my face with grit and the scent of burnt rubber. "Kira, get Leo and run!" Malakor's voice was a ragged whisper. He was trying to push himself up, but his arm was useless, and the silver gas from the basement was finally starting to settle into his lungs. He coughed, a dark, metallic sound that made my stomach twist. "I'm not leaving you to be turned into a trophy," I snapped. I stood up, planting my boots firmly in the dirt. I didn't have a gun. I didn't have a wolf's strength. I had a heavy-duty wrench and a repo agent's grudge. The helicopter side doors slid open. Vane stood there, looking down at us like we were ants he was tired of stepping on. He held a high-caliber rifle, the silver-etched barrel gleaming in the spotlight. "Such a waste of a good bloodline," Vane called out over the roar. "And for what? A human who treats you like a dog?" "She treats me like a man," Malakor snarled, his voice regaining some of its regal bite. He managed to get to one knee, his good hand gripping my ankle for support. It wasn't a plea, it was an anchor. "Which is more than you ever did." Vane sighed, the sound lost in the wind. He leveled the rifle at Malakor's head. "Goodbye, brother." He didn't see me move. Nobody ever expects the defensive violence of someone who spends their life outthinking bigger, meaner shifters. I didn't throw the wrench at Van. I threw it at the helicopter's tail rotor. It was a 1-in-a-million shot, born of desperation and the kind of aim you get from tossing heavy chains in the dark. The wrench didn't break the rotor, but it wedged into the housing with a spectacular crack, shatter. The helicopter lurched violently. Van's shot went wide, the silver bullet whistling past my ear and burying itself in the dirt. He tumbled backward into the cabin as the pilot struggled to regain control of the spinning bird. "Leo, get the winch!" I screamed. My brother, who had been hiding behind the truck's cab, didn't hesitate. He grabbed the heavy hook and the remaining 50 feet of cable that was still dangling from the front of the truck. He didn't ask what I was doing. He just hauled it over. "Hook the skid!" I yelled. As the helicopter dipped low in its struggle to stay level, the landing skid swept just feet above our heads. I grabbed the hook from Leo, and with a heave that nearly tore my shoulders out of their sockets, I leaped and latched it onto the metal rail. "Malakor, the override!" I shouted. The king understood instantly. He lunged for the remote I'd dropped in the dirt. With his good hand, he smashed the retract button. The winch groaned. The truck, still anchored by its weight on the cliffside, acted as a lead weight. The helicopter wasn't going anywhere. It was tethered to the earth, the cable singing with a lethal amount of tension as the pilot tried to floor the engines. "You're going to pull them down!" Leo shouted, shielding his eyes. "No," I said, my eyes fixed on Vane as he scrambled back to the open door, looking down in horror at the cable locking him to us. "I'm going to bring them to me." The helicopter was forced lower and lower, the engines screaming in protest. Vane looked at me, his face pale with a mix of fury and genuine shock. He raised his rifle again, but he was shaking. The vibration of the tethered bird was too much. "Drop it, Vane!" Malakor roared, standing tall now, his golden eyes reflecting the spotlight. "Or the girl lets the winch go, and the snapback will take your head off." Vane hesitated. In that second, the wind shifted. A massive, dark shape launched itself from the tree line. It wasn't one of Vane's men. It was a rogue, one of the wolves I'd been repoing from earlier, and he looked hungry. The rogue slammed into the side of the helicopter, the weight causing the bird to tilt dangerously toward the cliff's edge. "Kira, the cable!" Malakor yelled. It was too late. The tension was too high. The hook snapped. The cable whipped back toward us like a steel lash. I dove for the dirt, pulling Leo down with me. The helicopter, suddenly freed, shot upward and backward, right into the path of the rising moon and the waiting cliff face. It clipped the rocks and vanished into the darkness below. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the crackle of a small fire in the brush. "Is he dead?" Leo whispered. Malakor didn't answer. He was staring at the tree line. The rogue wasn't alone. A dozen pairs of yellow eyes were blinking in the shadows, and they weren't looking at the wreckage. They were looking at the Alpha King, who was too injured to shift. Chapter 10. The growls started as a low, vibrating hum in the earth, a sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up like iron filings. These weren't Vane's disciplined soldiers. These were the Dreg Pack, the rogues, the debt dodgers, and the outcasts I'd been harassing for months. And they'd just seen their king bleed. Malakor swayed on his feet, his breath coming in ragged hitches. The silver gas was a slow poison, and his mangled arm was dripping a steady trail of crimson into the dirt. He looked at the shadows, his jaw set in a grim line of defiance. "Get in the truck, Kira," he said, his voice a gravelly command. "Take the boy and go. They want me."
"Not you."
"I don't leave my cargo behind, Sparky," I snapped, stepping in front of him. I picked up a heavy tire iron from the dirt, weighing it in my hand. "And right now, you're the most expensive thing on my books." "Kira, be reasonable," Malakor groaned, trying to shove me aside. I didn't budge. I used my elbow to poke him squarely in his bruised ribs, making him hiss in pain. "Don't tell me to be reasonable when you're the one who just used your arm as a brake pad," I retorted. "Leo, get the emergency flares from the toolbox, the magnesium ones." One of the rogues, a massive, scarred, brindled wolf, stepped into the light. He didn't shift to human. He stayed in that terrifying middle ground, standing on two legs with a snout full of yellowed fangs. He looked at Malakor, then at me, a cruel intelligence in his eyes. "The king is broken," the rogue rasped, his voice a wet snarl, "and the human thinks she can hold back the tide with a piece of iron." "I don't think I can hold you back," I said, my voice cold and clear. "I know I can." I didn't wait for him to lunge. I signaled Leo. My brother struck the first flare, and the world exploded into a blinding, white-hot magnesium glare. The wolves, their sensitive eyes tuned for the dark, let out yelps of agony, recoiling from the chemical fire. In the confusion, I turned to Malakor. I didn't ask. I grabbed his good arm, threw it over my shoulder, and used my physical authority to hoist him toward the cab of the truck. "Move it, Your Highness. If you faint now, I'm leaving you for the crows." "You are the most irritating female I have ever met," Malakor panted, his weight leaning heavily on me as we scrambled into the truck. I shoved him into the middle of the bench seat, Leo jumping in on the other side. The truck was a wreck, windows gone, wires hanging, but the engine was still humming, a testament to the old-school diesel heart I'd spent years maintaining. I slammed it into gear and floored it, the tires throwing up a cloud of dust and gravel as we tore away from the cliffside. The rogues were recovering, their howls of rage echoing behind us, but they couldn't match a truck on a straightaway. "Where are we going?" Leo asked, looking back at the receding eyes in the dark. "To the one place nobody expects an alpha king to hide," I said, gripping the wheel. "My garage. It's off the grid, lined with lead mesh for the radio equipment, and I've got enough first aid supplies to patch up a small army." Malakor let his head fall back against the seat, his eyes fluttering shut. "A garage," he muttered. "I'm the king, and I'm being hidden in a garage." "Shut up and bleed quietly," I told him, though my hand reached out and squeezed his thigh for a brief second. A silent thank you. We drove for an hour, weaving through back roads and logging trails until we reached the corrugated metal shed I called home. I pulled the truck inside and hit the remote for the heavy security door. The world went silent as the metal slats slammed shut. I turned off the engine. The only sound was the ticking of the cooling metal and Malakor's shallow breathing. "Leo, go inside and get the heavy-duty antiseptic and the silver draw salve," I ordered. As my brother ran into the small living quarters, I turned to the man beside me. Malakor was looking at me, his eyes hooded, the amber glowing faintly in the dim cab light. "You saved me," he whispered. "Again." "It's a habit," I said, reaching out to wipe a smudge of blood from his forehead. "Don't let it go to your head." "It's not my head I'm worried about," he said, his hand suddenly moving with surprising speed to catch my wrist. He pulled me toward him, his face inches from mine. Even battered and poisoned, he radiated a power that made my breath hitch.
Kira, you realized what you did back there, didn't you?
I kept us from being eaten. Big deal.
No,
He said, his voice a low, possessive velvet.
You claimed me. In front of the dreg pack. You stood over an alpha and told the world he was your cargo. In shifter law, that's a challenge of ownership.
I went to pull away, but he didn't let go. He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of my ear.
And I've decided, he whispered, to accept the challenge.
The sound of the garage door being kicked from the outside made us both freeze. A familiar, cold voice drifted through the metal.
Kira, open up. We know he's in there, and we have the insurance papers for the Ferrari.
It wasn't Vane. It was the Royal Council, and they didn't sound like they were here to help. The metallic boom of a heavy fist hitting my garage door reverberated through the hollow space, shaking the wrenches on my pegboard. I didn't jump. I reached under the driver's seat of the truck and pulled out a sawed-off shotgun loaded with rock salt and silver shavings. The insurance papers? I muttered, my voice a low, dangerous rasp. They're a little late for a claim adjuster. Malakor was leaning against the center console, his face the color of damp parchment. He tried to sit up, but the silver gas in his lungs turned the movement into a violent coughing fit. He clutched his mangled arm, his knuckles white.
Kira, the council, he wheezed. They aren't here for an audit. They're here to see if I'm fit to lead. If they find me in a human's garage, being patched up with duct tape and antiseptic, they'll declare a regency. Vane wins by default.
Then it's a good thing I don't give a damn about shifter politics, I said, stepping out of the cab and signaling for Leo to stay in the back room. I walked toward the garage door, the heavy boots of the Royal Guard crunching on the gravel outside.
Kira, open the door and surrender the king,
a voice boomed. High Chancellor Valerius. He sounded like he'd spent his life inhaling old books and superiority complexes.
You are in possession of sovereign property. Interference is a capital offense.
Sovereign property? I yelled back, leveling the shotgun at the door's weakest seam. I repossess this property from a burning ditch. According to the laws of the road, I have a lien on his royal backside until my invoice is paid in full. You want him? You pay the tow fee. There was a stunned silence on the other side. They weren't used to humans talking back, let alone setting a price on their monarch.
You have 10 seconds, Valerius snapped, his patience evaporating, before we tear this shack down.
I turned back to Malakor. He was watching me, a pained, feverish light in his eyes. Even at death's door, he looked like he wanted to devour me. I need to get that silver out of your arm, I whispered, kneeling beside the open truck door. If I don't, the necrosis will hit your heart before they even get the door open.
Do it,
he said, baring his teeth in a grimace. I've survived worse than a repo agent with a pair of pliers. I'm using a vacuum pump and a soldering iron, Sparky. Brace yourself. I didn't offer him a leather strap to bite on. I grabbed his good hand and forced it onto the truck's door handle. Squeeze that if it hurts. If you scream, the council knows you're weak. Don't give them the satisfaction. The first blow hit the garage door, a sledgehammer or a shifter's fist. I didn't care which. The metal buckled. I ignored it. I sliced open Malakor's sleeve, revealing the blackened veins where the silver-edged machinery had shredded his muscle. I doused the wound in industrial-grade antiseptic. Malakor's entire body jerked, his good hand crushing the steel handle of the truck door until it snapped off in his grip. He didn't make a sound. His eyes stayed locked on mine, golden and burning with a terrifying, agonizing focus. "Nice grip," I breathed, my own hands shaking as I began the grim work of extracting the silver shards. Outside, the door groaned again. A corner of the metal sheet peeled back, revealing a pair of glowing yellow eyes. "She's attacking him!" the guard outside shouted, seeing me bent over Malakor with a blade. "Breach! Breach now!" The garage door was ripped off its tracks. Sunlight, or what was left of it, poured in, illuminating the carnage of my shop. 6 elite guards charged in, their spears leveled, their faces masks of righteous fury. I didn't look up from the wound. I reached out blindly, grabbed a heavy CO2 fire extinguisher from the wall, and kicked the release valve toward the entrance. A cloud of freezing white gas billowed out, blinding the guards and sending them into a coughing fit. "I said," I roared over the hiss of the gas, "I am working. Nobody enters my shop without an appointment." I felt Malakor's hand catch the back of my neck, pulling me down as a spear whistled through the air where my head had been a second ago. He was shaking, his skin hot with fever, but his grip was like iron. "Kira," he rasped, his lips grazing my ear. "The secondary door, the one behind the tool chest. Take the boy. Go." "Not without my cargo," I said, finally pulling the last shard of silver from his arm. I stood up, the shotgun in one hand and a flare in the other. I looked at the High Chancellor, who was standing at the threshold of my ruined home, looking disgusted. "You've made a mistake, girl," Valerius said. "Yeah," I replied, striking the flare. "I forgot to charge you for the door." I dropped the flare into the puddle of leaked hydraulic fluid beneath the truck. The floor erupted in a wall of flame, separating us from the council. In the chaos, I grabbed Malakor's collar and hauled him toward the hidden exit. But as we hit the fresh air of the woods, a shadow dropped from the trees. It wasn't a guard. It was a wolf, pure white, massive, and wearing a crown of braided silver. The Queen Mother had arrived, and she didn't look like she was here to negotiate. 12. The white wolf didn't growl. She didn't need to. The sheer weight of her presence made the forest go silent. The birds stopped chirping, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. She shifted in a blur of moonlight and silk, standing before us as a woman who looked like she'd been carved from a glacier. "Mother," Malakor breathed, his voice a ghost of its usual strength. He tried to stand straight, but he slumped against my shoulder, his weight nearly taking us both down. "You look pathetic, Malakor," Queen Hera said, her eyes, the same amber as his, but colder, sweeping over his shredded clothes and blackened arm. Then she turned that freezing gaze on me. "And you, the little scavenger who thinks she can keep a king in a shed." "I'm a reclamation specialist," I corrected, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my grip on Malakor's waist tightening. "And right now, your son is under a protective lien. You want him? You talk to me, not to him." Hera's eyebrows rose. A small, dangerous smile touched her lips. "He told me you were bossy. He didn't mention you were suicidal." "Occupational hazard," I snapped. "Your council is back there trying to stage a coup while your son is dying of silver poisoning. If you're here to help, get the boy and get us out of here. If you're here to join the Regency, then you'd better start swinging, because I'm not moving." Behind us, the fire in my garage roared, the heat licking at our backs. The council guards were screaming orders, trying to navigate the flames. We were trapped between a burning home and a frozen queen. Hera looked at Leo, who was trembling but holding a tire iron like a holy relic. She looked at her son, who was looking at me with a pathetic, obsessed devotion that clearly irritated her. "The council is comprised of fools," Hera said, her voice like cracking ice. "But they are fools with an army. Vane has convinced them that you are compromised, Malakor, that this human has used some low magic to bind you." "She didn't use magic," Malakor growled, his hand finding mine in the dark and squeezing. "She used a tow truck." Hera sighed, a sound of profound maternal disappointment. "Get in the van. It's parked a mile down the logging trail. If we stay here, I'll have to kill my own chancellor just to keep the peace. And I simply don't have the wardrobe for a civil war today." She turned and began walking into the woods without checking to see if we followed. "Is she for real?" Leo whispered, his eyes wide. "She's a queen, Leo." "They're all for real," I said, hoisting Malakor's arm back over my shoulder. "Move, before the garage blows." We hiked through the thick brush, the smell of wood smoke following us. Every step was a battle. Malakor was fading fast, his skin turning a translucent, waxy gray. By the time we reached the nondescript black van, he was barely conscious, his head lolling against my neck. "Lay him in the back," Hera commanded, sliding the side door open. The interior was a mobile surgical suite, clean, white, and smelling of ozone. "I have a healer waiting at the safe house. But you, human, you stay up front with me. We need to discuss the bill you mentioned." I helped Leo into the back with Malakor, watching as a masked healer immediately began hooking the king up to a silver dialysis machine. I felt a pang of something sharp and uncomfortable. Jealousy? No, it was the loss of control. He was out of my hands now. He was back in his world. I climbed into the passenger seat. Hera floored it, the van ghosting through the trees with an electric hum. "You love him," she said, not looking at me. "I have a professional interest in his survival," I lied. "Don't bore me with lies. My son is a monster. He is obsessive, violent, and arrogant. Most women kneel because they have to. You made him kneel because you wanted to." She glanced at me, her eyes sharp. "That makes you more dangerous than Vane." "I just want my life back," I said, looking out at the dark trees. "I want my truck fixed and my brother safe." "You'll never have your life back," Hera said. "You've tasted the blood of a king. You've commanded the North. You think you can go back to repoing sedans in the suburbs?" She slammed on the brakes. In the middle of the road stood a figure. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't a man. It was a towering construct of silver and shadow, eyes glowing with a familiar, hateful blue light. "Vane," I whispered. "Not Vane," Hera said, her voice trembling for the first time. "It's a soul eater. Vane didn't just stage a coup. He made a deal with the void." The construct raised a hand, and the van's engine died. The lights flickered and went out. In the back, Malakor let out a primal, agonized scream as the dialysis machine shorted out, sending a surge of raw power through his weakened body. Chapter 13. The silence inside the van was more terrifying than the screaming engine had been. The only light came from the glowing blue eyes of the construct standing 20 yards ahead, and the faint, rhythmic pulse of the dialysis machine's emergency backup light. "Stay in the car," Hera commanded, her hand on the door latch. Her fingernails were already elongating into lethal ivory talons. "Like hell," I snapped, reaching into the glove box. I didn't find a gun, but I found a heavy, decorative letter opener with a silver hilt. It would have to do. That thing is feeding on the power in the van. If we stay here, it'll drain Malakor dry before he can even shift. I kicked my door open. At the same time, Hera leaped from hers. The air outside was freezing, unnaturally so. Every breath felt like swallowing needles. The construct, the Soul Eater, moved with a jerky, stop-motion horror. It wasn't solid. It was a swirling mass of shadows held together by a rib cage of ancient, blackened silver. Vane hadn't just gone rogue. He'd opened a door that should have stayed locked forever. Hera shifted midair, a streak of white fur and fury slamming into the construct. But instead of tearing flesh, her claws passed through the shadow like it was smoke. The Soul Eater let out a sound like grinding stones and backhanded the Queen Mother, sending her flying into the trees. "Hera!" I yelled. The construct turned its head toward me. It didn't have a face, just a void where a soul should be. It started to glide toward the van, toward Malakor. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I ran at the thing, the silver letter opener held tight. "Hey, Shadow Glow!" I screamed. "Over here!" I lunged, aiming for the silver ribcage. I expected to hit air, but the silver was physical. The blade sparked against the metal, and a jolt of ice-cold energy shot up my arm, numbing my shoulder instantly. The construct hissed, a sound that vibrated in my teeth and swiped at me. I rolled under the strike, my repo agent reflexes saving my life by an inch. I ended up near the back of the van, where Leo was staring out the window, his face a mask of pure horror. "Kira, the jumper cables!" Leo shouted, his voice cracking. I looked at the van. The battery was dead, but the dialysis machine was still holding a massive capacitive charge from the short circuit. If I could bridge the gap. "Leo, throw me the leads!" My brother scrambled to the back, grabbed the heavy-duty cables from the emergency kit, and tossed them through the broken window. I caught them, the copper cold in my hands. "Malakor!" I yelled, banging on the side of the van. "I need a spark! Give me everything you've got left!" Inside, I heard a low, guttural roar. The van began to shake. The king was forcing a shift, something he shouldn't be doing with silver gas in his blood. The windows cracked as his power surged, an uncontrolled explosion of alpha energy. The Soul Eater sensed the feast. It ignored me and lunged for the side of the van, its shadow claws tearing through the reinforced paneling like it was parchment. I didn't wait. I clamped one end of the jumper cables to the van's frame and held the other two leads like a lash. As the construct reached into the van to grab Malakor's throat, I leaped onto its back. The cold was unbearable. It felt like my skin was being stripped away. I jammed the live leads directly into the construct's silver rib cage. "Repossessed!" I screamed. The circuit closed. Malakor's raw, untamed alpha energy traveled through the dialysis machine, into the van's frame, and surged through the cables. A blinding arc of white lightning erupted between me and the Soul Eater. The construct shrieked, a sound of pure digital agony, and began to dissipate, the shadows being burned away by the brilliance of the king's power. But the kickback was massive. I was thrown backward, my body hitting the asphalt with a sickening thud. Darkness swamped my vision, the world spinning into a blur of gray and gold. Through the haze, I saw the van door get ripped off its hinges. A wolf stepped out. He wasn't the broken man I'd been patching up. He was a beast of nightmare, black fur, eyes of molten gold, and a crown of scars. He stood over me, his presence so vast it seemed to block out the stars. He leaned down, his massive head inches from mine. He didn't growl.
He let out a low, vibrating whimper of grief. Then he looked toward the city, toward the palace where Vane was waiting. He let out a howl that shook the very foundations of the forest, a declaration of war that echoed for miles. He picked me up in his jaws, gentle as a summer breeze, and tossed me onto his back. "Malakor," I whispered, my fingers tangling in his thick fur. He didn't stop. He began to run, not away from the danger, but straight toward the heart of the kingdom. But as we cleared the tree line, I saw the sky. It wasn't black anymore. It was burning red, and thousands of soul eaters were rising from the city streets like smoke. The wind didn't just whistle past my ears. It roared like a jet engine. I was flattened against Malakor's back, my fingers buried deep in the thick, coarse fur of his neck. Every time his massive paws hit the pavement, the impact jarred my teeth, but I didn't let go. Below us, the city was a graveyard of neon and shadow. The red sky cast a sickly, bruised glow over the streets, illuminating the swarms of soul eaters rising like tectonic ash from the gutters. "Malakor, slow down!" I shouted, though the words were ripped from my mouth the moment they left my lips. He didn't slow. He was a four-legged engine of vengeance. He leaped over a stalled city bus, his shadow stretching long and terrifying across the asphalt. As we landed, 3 of those shadow constructs lunged from a nearby alley. Malakor didn't even break stride. He snapped his jaws midair, the golden light radiating from his throat, disintegrating the ghosts into harmless mist before they could touch his skin. "The palace is locked down," I yelled, leaning closer to his ear. "Vane has the silver gas perimeter active. If you charge the front gates, you're just delivering yourself to a furnace." Malakor let out a low, vibrating growl that I felt in my tailbone. He wasn't thinking like a king right now. He was thinking like a predator. But I was still a repo agent, and I knew how to get into places where people didn't want me. "Turn left at the next intersection," I commanded, digging my heels into his sides. "The old transit tunnels. They haven't been mapped since the Great Shift. They go directly under the throne room's foundation." He didn't hesitate. He veered hard, his claws digging deep furrows into the street as he took the corner at 40 miles per hour. We barreled toward a rusted, corrugated gate, a service entrance for the subway. "Don't stop!" I screamed, shielding my face with my arms. Malakor hit the gate like a cannonball. The metal didn't just bend, it exploded outward, the screeching sound echoing through the cavernous tunnels. We plunged into the darkness, the only light coming from the golden fire of Malakor's eyes. The air down here was thick with damp earth and the scent of ancient stone, a mercy compared to the ozone and silver of the streets above. He finally slowed to a trot, his heavy breathing echoing off the tunnel walls. I slid off his back, my legs shaking so hard I had to lean against the cold, slimy brick for support. I looked at him, the massive, black wolf whose fur was matted with my own blood and the soot of the city. "You're burning up," I whispered, reaching out to touch his flank. The heat coming off him was intense, a byproduct of the forced shift and the silver still lingering in his system. "You can't keep this form much longer, Malakor. The shift is eating you alive." He huffed, a warm blast of air that smelled of iron and forest, and nudged my shoulder with his snout. He was telling me to keep moving. He was telling me he didn't care if he burned out, as long as he took Vane with him. "Leo, you okay?" I turned back to see my brother climbing out from the shadows of the tunnel entrance. He had been riding on the king's haunches, clinging on for dear life. I think I left my stomach back at the garage, Leo wheezed, clutching his tire iron. But I'm here. I looked up at the ceiling. I could hear the rhythmic thump-thump of the palace's heavy machinery above us. We were directly beneath the heart of the kingdom. We need to climb the ventilation shaft, I said, looking at a narrow iron grate high on the wall. It leads to the sub-basement. But Malakor, you can't fit in there. Not like this. The wolf looked at the grate, then at me. His eyes dimmed for a moment, and then the sickening sound of snapping bone filled the tunnel. He began to shrink, the fur receding, the massive frame collapsing back into the shape of a man. He hit the floor with a groan, naked and trembling, his skin covered in a cold, gray sweat. I didn't turn away. I stripped off my heavy work vest and threw it over him. Get up, Sparky. We've got a throne to reclaim. He looked up at me, his amber eyes clouded with pain but still fiercely possessive. He reached out, his hand catching my ankle. If I die up there, I want you to take the drive. I want you to run. I told you before, I said, leaning down and grabbing his chin, forcing him to look at me. I don't leave my cargo, and right now, you're the only cargo I've got left. I pulled him to his feet, but as I did, the floor beneath us groaned. A section of the wall crumbled, and 3 royal guards, their eyes glowing with that same hollow blue soul-eater light, stepped out of the dust. They weren't holding spears. They were holding canisters of silver gas, the nozzles pointed directly at us. New problem, I muttered, raising my lead-weighted mag light. Chapter 15. I didn't wait for the guards to pull the triggers. I swung the mag light in a wide arc, catching the lead guard square in his jaw. The physical authority behind the hit was enough to send him spinning, but he didn't grunt. He didn't even bleed. He just reset his head with a sickening click and kept coming. They're puppets, Kira, Malakor rasped, leaning against the wall for support. Vane isn't just using the soul leaders as soldiers. He's using them as batteries to reanimate the dead. Great. Zombie guards, I snapped. I ducked under a spray of silver mist, the toxic vapor sizzling against the stone wall. Leo, the grease. My brother reached into his pack and pulled out a pressurized can of industrial lubricant I'd grabbed from the garage. He tossed it to me. I caught it midair, sprayed a thick, slick coat over the tunnel floor, and then kicked a heavy iron pipe into the path of the second guard. The guard hit the grease and went down hard, his heavy armor clattering. While he struggled for traction, I lunged for the third one. I didn't try to outmuscle him. I used my height advantage and shoved him backward into the first guard, tangling their limbs in the narrow space. Malakor, the Great, go! I didn't ask. I grabbed the back of his neck and literally hoisted him toward the iron rungs of the ventilation shaft. He was weak, his muscles failing, but the shock of me bossing him around seemed to spark a flicker of his old fire. He grabbed the rungs and began to climb, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Leo, move! I followed them up, my boots slipping on the metal as the guards below began to scramble up after us. The shaft was narrow, smelling of stale grease and old ozone. It felt like climbing through the throat of a mechanical beast. We reached the top, a small, cramped landing that opened into the palace's secondary security hub. The room was filled with flickering screens showing the carnage in the city. In the center of the room sat a massive silver-clad terminal. This is it, Malakor whispered, collapsing onto a chair. The bypass. If we can get the drive into this terminal, we can shut down the Soul Eaters and the gas perimeter. I pulled the silver cylinder from my pocket. It felt warm now, vibrating with a low, hungry hum. I moved toward the terminal, but as I reached for the port, the screens all went black. Then, a single face appeared. Vane. "You're late, Kira," Vane said, his voice smooth and distorted by the speakers. "I was expecting you 10 minutes ago. But then, I suppose hauling a dying king through a sewer takes time." "Shut up, Vane," I said, my hand hovering over the port. "I'm ending this." "Are you?" Vane leaned closer to the camera, his eyes completely blue now, devoid of anything human. "If you plug that drive in, the feedback loop will incinerate every shifter in this building who has even a trace of Soul Eater energy in them. That includes the guards, the servants, and your precious Malakor." I froze. I looked back at Malakor. He was watching me, his eyes wide. He knew. He'd known the whole time. "He's lying," Leo whispered, though we didn't sound sure. "I'm not," Vane purred. "Malakor was bitten by a Soul Eater on the cliff, remember? The infection is already in his blood. The drive is a purge, Kira. It clears the system by burning the host. You'll save the city, but you'll kill the man you've spent the last 24 hours reclaiming." I looked at the drive, then at Malakor. He didn't look afraid. He looked at me with a terrifying, calm acceptance. "Do it, Kira," he said, his voice steady. "The city, the pack, they matter more than one wolf." "I don't care about the city," I hissed, my heart breaking in my chest. "I care about my cargo, and I don't destroy my cargo to fix a mistake someone else made." "Then we have a stalemate," Vane said, laughing. Suddenly, the door to the hub was kicked open. It wasn't the zombie guards. It was Queen Hera, her white fur stained with black ichor, her eyes burning with a cold, maternal fury. "He's half right, human," she said, stepping into the room. "The purge will kill him, unless someone takes the load for him." "What does that mean?" I asked. Hera looked at me, a strange, respect-filled sadness in her eyes. "A Soul Eater bond can be transferred. If a human, someone with no wolf magic, acts as a grounding wire, the energy can pass through them into the earth. It will hurt. It might even stop your heart. But it will save him." I looked at Malakor. I looked at the terminal. Then I looked at the Queen. "Tell me where to stand," I said. Chapter 16. "Kira, no!" Malakor tried to surge out of the chair, but his legs gave way and he slumped back, a snarl of desperation on his lips. "I won't let you do this. I am the king. I take the hits, not you." "Shut up, Malakor," I barked, turning on him with a ferocity that made even Hera blink. I walked over to him, grabbed the front of my own vest he was wearing, and jerked him forward until our foreheads touched. I have spent my entire life being told I'm too much, or too bossy, or too dangerous. But right now, I'm the only thing between you and a funeral. You want to be a king? Then learn when to follow orders from someone who knows how to survive." He stared at me, his amber eyes trembling with a mix of fury, agony, and a deep, soul-shattering devotion. For the first time, he didn't try to dominate. He just breathed, his forehead resting against mine. "You're a nightmare," he whispered. "I'm a repo agent," I countered, "and I'm reclaiming your life, whether you like it or not." I turned to Hera. "How do we do this?" "The terminal has 2 manual override levers," Hera said, gesturing to the heavy iron handles on either side of the drive port. "You must hold both.
When the drive engages, the energy will seek the path of least resistance. You have to be that path. You have to ground the alpha's soul to your own. I walked to the terminal. I looked at the red sky through the high window, then at the silver cylinder in my hand. I shoved it into the port. The terminal began to scream, a high-pitched electronic wail that made my ears bleed. "Now!" Hera yelled. I grabbed the iron levers. The moment my palms hit the metal, the world vanished into a white-hot explosion of pain. It wasn't like an electric shock. It was like being filled with liquid lead. I felt Malakor's soul, his memories, his rage, his bone-deep obsession with the North surge through me. It was too much. It was a tidal wave of fire that threatened to turn my bones to ash. I felt the Soul Eater infection in his blood being dragged toward me, a cold, oily darkness that fought against the light. I didn't let go. I squeezed the levers until the metal began to deform under my grip. "Stay with me," I thought, screaming the words in the silence of my own mind. I saw Malakor on the floor, his body arching in agony as the black veins on his arm began to glow with a brilliant golden light. He was screaming, but I couldn't hear him over the sound of my own heart failing. One more second, just one more. The room erupted. A shock wave of pure golden energy slammed outward, shattering every screen in the hub and blowing the door off its hinges. The blue mist in the city streets outside didn't just fade, it was vaporized. I felt my heart stop. A long, flat line of silence stretched out in my chest. I felt myself falling, the floor rushing up to meet me, but I didn't feel the impact. I was drifting in a sea of amber and gold. "Kira." The voice was low, vibrating, and filled with a terrifying amount of love. I opened my eyes. I was lying on the floor of the hub. The terminal was a melted heap of slag. The air was clear. The red sky was gone, replaced by the first gray light of dawn. Malakor was kneeling over me. He looked different. The gray pallor was gone. His eyes were solid gold, radiating a power that felt steady and ancient. He looked like a king who had finally earned his crown. He didn't say anything. He just picked me up, cradling me against his chest, like I was the most fragile, precious thing in the world. "You did it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved us all." I told you," I wheezed, my voice barely a thread. "Nice bumper." He let out a short, wet laugh and pressed his forehead to mine. "The city is safe. Vane is gone, but we have a problem." "What now?" I asked, closed my eyes, exhausted. "The council," Malakor said, his voice turning cold. "They're outside, and they've realized that I didn't just survive. I bonded. They're demanding to know who the new queen of the North is." I opened one eye. Tell them she's busy. She has a tow truck to repair." Malakor smiled, a true, wicked smile. "I don't think they'll take no for an answer, Kira. Especially not since you're currently glowing." I looked down at my hands. Faint, golden veins were pulsing beneath my skin. I wasn't human anymore. I wasn't a shifter. I was something else entirely. The door to the hub creaked open. High Chancellor Valerius stepped in, followed by a dozen guards. They didn't have their weapons drawn. They looked at me, then at Malakor, and they all dropped to one knee. "The king is restored," Valerius intoned, "and the anchor has been found. All hail the sovereign pair." I looked at Malakor. The sovereign pair? Does that mean I get a dental plan? It means, Malakor said, standing up with me in his arms and facing his people, that you're never leaving my side again. But as he spoke, a small black bird landed on the windowsill. It wasn't a normal bird. It had blue eyes. Vane isn't dead, the bird chirped, its voice a perfect mimicry of my brother's. And he has the other half of the drive. Chapter 17. The bird's beak clattered like a pair of dice on the marble sill. I didn't wait for it to finish its message. I reached out and snatched the thing out of the air, my fingers closing around its throat with a speed that surprised even me. The bird didn't feel like feathers. It felt like cold, oily smoke that hummed against my palm. Tell your boss his other half is going to look real good under the tread of my boots, I hissed. I squeezed, and the construct dissolved into a puddle of black ink that stained my fingers. I wiped the mess on my pants and looked at Malakor. He was standing tall now, his golden eyes tracking the remnants of the shadow smoke as it drifted toward the open window. The power rolling off him was a physical weight, but the golden glow beneath my own skin was pushing back, creating a strange, static-charged bubble around us. He's at the coast, Malakor said, his voice dropping into that low, predatory register that usually meant people were about to start dying. The old shipping yards. That's where the main server for the silver gas grid is housed. If he has the second drive, he doesn't need to infect the city. He can just drown it. Then we're wasting time standing here listening to a bunch of guys in skirts, I said, jerking my chin toward the High Chancellor and the guard still kneeling on the floor. Valerius, get up. If you want a queen, you'd better find me a vehicle with at least 400 horsepower and a reinforced chassis. My truck is scrap, and I'm not walking to the coast. Valerius looked up, his face a mask of shock. You would address the council so? My lady, the coronation protocols, the only protocol right now is don't let the city choke, I snapped. I stepped toward him, the golden veins in my arms pulsing with a sudden violent light. Move, or I'll repossess that fancy staff of yours and use it as a jackhandle. Malakor let out a dark, amused rumble. You heard her, Chancellor. The anchor is hungry. Bring her the keys to the Royal Armored Transport. And someone find my beta, the one I haven't killed yet. 10 minutes later, we were barreling down the palace steps. The Royal Transport turned out to be a custom-built 8-wheeled beast that looked like a tank had a one-night stand with a limousine. It was matte black, bulletproof, and smelled like leather and fresh grease. I'm driving, I said, sliding into the leather bucket seat before Malakor could even reach for the door. Naturally, he murmured, climbing in beside me. Leo scrambled into the back, clutching a bag of silver-tipped bolts he'd salvaged from the hub. I hit the ignition. The engine didn't just start. It roared, a deep-throated growl that vibrated through my chest and made the golden light in my blood sing. I slammed it into gear and tore out of the palace courtyard, the tires screaming as I drifted the 10-ton beast around the first marble fountain. Kira, Malakor said, his hand resting on my thigh. His touch was hot, searingly so, but for the first time, it didn't feel like he was trying to claim me. It felt like we were two parts of a single circuit. The power you took, the anchor. It isn't just a battery. You can feel him, can't you? I gripped the wheel tighter. I could. It was a faint, oily itch at the back of my mind, a directional pull toward the east. It was Vane. Or rather, It was the void energy Vane was holding.
He feels like a dirty engine, I muttered. He needs a tune-up, with a sledgehammer.
He's going to use the drive to bridge the gap between our world and the void, Malakor explained, his eyes fixed on the road ahead.
He doesn't want to rule the North anymore. He wants to feed it to the shadows. If he opens that gate, there is no reclamation. There is only the end.
Then it's a good thing I'm a specialist in difficult recoveries, I said. We hit the industrial district, the sky turning a bruised purple as we approached the coast. The shipping yards were a maze of rusted cranes and stacked containers, looking like the skeletal remains of a dead giant. The itch in my head grew into a thrumming ache. There, I said, pointing toward a massive windowless concrete block at the end of the pier. The grid hub. I didn't slow down. I aimed the transport directly at the perimeter fence, the heavy iron mesh snapping like toothpicks as we plowed through. But as we neared the main doors, the ground beneath the wheels began to liquefy.
"Kira, look out!"
Leo yelled. A massive, shadowy hand, 50 feet wide, erupted from the asphalt, grabbing the front axle of the transport and lifting us into the air. The engine screamed as the wheels spun uselessly in the grip of the darkness. Vane stepped out from the shadows of the hub, the second silver drive glowing a malevolent, blinding blue in his hand. He wasn't alone. Standing behind him, draped in chains made of frozen light, was a woman with white hair and empty, weeping eyes.
"Mother?"
Malakor roared, his hand shattering the window glass in rage. She isn't your mother anymore, Malakor. Vane's voice echoed through the yard. She's the key. And the girl? The girl is the final component. Vane raised the drive, and a beam of blue light shot out, hitting me directly in the chest through the windshield. The golden light in my veins turned to ice. My heart stopped.
"Kira!"
I didn't fall. I felt my body being pulled forward, through the glass, toward Vane. I wasn't a driver anymore. I was the bridge.
"Nice bumper,"
Vane hissed, his face twisting into a grin as I floated toward his outstretched hand.
"Let's see how it handles the void."
The cold wasn't just a temperature. It was an erasure. As I drifted toward Vane, suspended in that sickening blue beam, I felt my memories of grease, grit, and the smell of Malakor's skin starting to flake away like old paint. My boots dangled uselessly in the air, the heavy iron toes no longer touching the earth I'd spent my life reclaiming.
"Let her go!"
Malakor's roar was the only thing keeping me anchored to the here and now. I saw him throw himself against the interior of the transport, his fist shattering the reinforced glass. He didn't wait for the doors to unlock. He tore the metal frame out of the hinges with his bare hands and leaped into the void-slicked air. But the shadow hand holding the truck slammed down, pinning him to the asphalt under 6 tons of armored steel.
"She's the anchor, Malakor,"
Vane shouted, his voice vibrating with a hollow, metallic resonance.
"She doesn't belong to you. She belongs to the gap between worlds. She is the grounding wire for the end of everything."
Vane reached out, his fingers inches from my throat. The second silver drive in his hand was humming at a frequency that made my teeth feel like they were going to explode. I couldn't move my arms. I couldn't breathe. The golden light in my veins was being sucked toward him, turning a sickly, stagnant violet as it left my body.
"I am not a wire,"
I managed to choke out. I didn't try to fight the beam. I did what I always did when a load was too heavy for the winch. I shifted the center of gravity. I stopped fighting the pull and leaned into it. I let the void energy flood into me, using the golden anchor light to wrap around the darkness like a cage. Vane's eyes widened. "What are you doing? You'll burn!" "I've been burned before," I hissed. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I fought the paralysis. I didn't grab Vane's throat. I grabbed the silver drive in his hand. The moment my skin touched the metal, the circuit was complete. The sky didn't just turn red, it fractured. A bolt of pure, white-hot energy erupted from the point where our hands met, lashing out like a whip. It struck Hera's chains, shattering the frozen light and sending the Queen Mother tumbling toward the ground. "Malakor, now!" I screamed, the sound tearing my throat. Under the truck, I saw the flash of gold. Malakor didn't shift into a wolf. He didn't have the space. Instead, he channeled every ounce of his sovereign power into his spine, heaving upward. The 10-ton transport flipped like a toy, the shadow hand dissipating into mist. Malakor was on his feet in a heartbeat. He didn't look at Vane. He looked at me, his eyes two burning suns of absolute obsessive fury. He leaped, his fingers catching my waist just as the second drive began to melt in my hand. "Kira, let go!" he roared. "The feedback will kill you." "If I let go, the gate opens!" I shouted back, the violet light crawling up my face. "I have to collapse the bridge. Then we collapse it together." Malakor grabbed my hands, his palms sandwiching mine over the melting silver cylinder. The golden king light and the violet void light collided in the small space between our chests. The pressure was astronomical. It felt like a star was being born in my gut. Vane screamed, reaching for the drive, but Hera was there. She had shifted into the white wolf, her jaws snapping shut around Vane's shoulder, dragging him back into the shadows of the hub. "Close it, Kira!" Hera's voice echoed in my mind. "Reclaim the North!" I looked at Malakor. His face was inches from mine, his forehead pressed against the bridge of my nose. He was smiling, a fierce, terrifying, beautiful smile. "On 3, I whispered. 1, he growled. 2, 3. We didn't just drop the drive, we crushed it. The explosion was silent. A wave of pure, neutralizing energy washed over the shipping yards, turning the shadows into dust and the blue light into a soft morning mist. The pressure vanished. The gravity returned. We hit the asphalt together, tangled in a heap of bruised limbs and torn clothes. I lay there for a long time, the smell of burnt ozone and salt air filling my lungs. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm. I looked at my hands. The golden veins were gone, replaced by the familiar grease stains and a few new scars. "Is it over?" Leo's voice came from somewhere near the flipped truck. I sat up, wincing as my ribs protested. Malakor was sitting next to me, his chest heaving, his eyes back to their warm, predatory amber. He looked at the hub. It was a shell, the void energy gone. Vane was nowhere to be seen, only a pile of gray ash where he had stood. Malakor turned to me. He didn't say thank you. He didn't offer a crown. He reached out, grabbed the back of my neck, and pulled me into a kiss that tasted like iron, smoke, and a debt that could never be paid. "Nice bumper," he whispered against my lips when he finally let me breathe. I leaned my head against his shoulder, looking at the ruin of the royal transport and the rising sun over the Blackwater River. You're paying for the truck, Sparky, I muttered. And I want a sunroof this time. Malakor laughed, a deep, rich sound that echoed across the quiet pier. He stood up, hoisting me into his arms as Hera and the council guards approached.
You can have whatever you want, Kira,
he said, looking at his people, then back at me.
But the repo office is closed. From now on, you only reclaim me.
I looked at the horizon, then at the man who had traded his kingdom for a driver. We'll see, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. I still haven't seen your insurance papers. Quick favor, don't go anywhere yet. If you thought this alpha was possessive, you haven't seen anything. I just need the world's most dangerous king in the royal jewels, and instead of killing me, he actually smiled. Click the video on your screen right now for Get Off! I need the Alpha King in the groin. Trust me, you can't miss this one.